the possibility to use these linkages, in some of the health database in Brazil, And here is an example of a study that was done before Cidacs was organized, and showing that the linkage is possible, that you create to answer a question like this one that she studied. What you did here in Cidacs at the beginning was create this what you call 100 million cohort. Now 100 million cohort is basically, as I said before, the data from Cadastro Único, that is a kind of a baseline, or a kind of backbone of the structure, And to this is linked, the Cadastro Único, where a lot of information on family composition, education, household characteristics, income, kind of work, etc., is have in this database, But there is no any health data here, It's only social and economic data, And to this structure, now you can link the programs, the social protection programs. So far in Cidacs you have the Bolsa Família. Então, for example, you have access to this data, then you link this data to this structure, then you have longitudinally know if a family receives Bolsa Família, for how long, how much receive over time. In general, who did the evaluation of social protection, then use more cross-sectional data, if the person receives or not, or something like that. They don't have this longitudinal structure, as we have, and it was possible to mountain using data, the Brazilian data. Only to say this great part of the data, the quality of the data in Brazil is reasonably good. It's not perfect, it's far from perfect. But the data on Cadastro Único, on the social programs, are very good because there is a lot of scrutiny and control of this data. And the healthy data is reasonably good, there was a lot of improvements in the quality of this data. Then it's possible to use in general this data to research. And then you link some of the healthy data, like the birth data of Brazil, the system of birth, that is the Ministry of Health that control that. The mortality data, there are some infectious disease data, leprosy, tuberculosis, for example, and other databases, the other databases coming, For example, recently we received the nutritional data. It's a huge database, on 50 million kids, since 2008, with data from measurement of the growth, of this kid that go in the health system in Brazil and registered data on growth. The hospitalization data from since 2008, is more over 10 years of hospitalization data. And this data is from the Brazilian National Health System, that cover around 75% of the Brazilian hospitalization done in Brazil, and probably over 95% of the population, of the hospitalization of the population in Cadastro Único. Then you have this, it data, arrival of new data is good, but create a different challenge, to put this data in the system is not an easy task at all. It takes time and a lot of validation, then the quality control, a lot of things is necessary, to have this data included. Here is a list of the data that you have so far, and then the number of you record, you see, everything is over 100 million, 100 million here. The payment of Bolsa Família, 27 million families received it during the historically, nowadays around 30 million is receiving, but historically, because when family receive and start to receive it, then there is around 27 million families. And the housing program near 1.3 million, mortality, cisterns is 100 million cisterns was distributed, was built up. That certificate you have near, nowadays you will grow that to near 20 million deaths. Yeah? We will have to develop some linkage systems, you softwares, you have our own linkage tools that were developed here, built in Cidacs, to speed the process, because you have the challenge to do this linkage involve millions and billions, and this creates some technical problems, and the people here develop a very interesting software to speed the process of the linkage. You building here, you see near here. Yesterday there was a presentation for a person from CLIMATIC, that is the left. They have a supercomputer center there. It's one of the few supercomputer centers in Brazil. And one part of our computer is in this computer center. You are linked with them by a closed line, fiber. And you have here in this building a safety room, that is where all this data, identified data, is kept. The system is part of the computer system also is there, and all the system is closed. Not connected to the internet. There is a lot of system of governance of this room. To keep it safe. The data, identified data that you have under our responsibility, to do, and it's necessary to do the linkage, and because you don't have a common number for all these different databases, then you need to rely on linkage using identifiers like name, age, and the others. Reason that why you need to have this identified database to do the linkage. You develop our concept of our platform, of data platform. This is a summary, a conceptual, a visual presentation of the conceived. I'm not going to detail on that. You have analysis, then you have two computer systems. You one for data production and another for data analysis. Given problems of safety, data protection. All the databases in Cidacs don't go out of Cidacs so far. You have a policy that all the analysis is done inside Cidacs. Anyone who wants to use the data from Cidacs, the data is produced, is extracted, it's identified. But even after the identification, the data go to another space where the analysis is done. In this space, could be used through VPN. There is people outside Cidacs that are using or do analysis of data here. From different institutions of Brazil. There is a group in Glasgow with whom we collaborate that also do analysis in the system of this data. People travel to London. You have a collaboration. The London School of Hygiene and people have been using accessing data here, but all under control. There is a control process. It's a control process, and this data, if they identified, the data cannot be downloaded. Then to protect the identification and the other things, you keep the data inside Cidacs without giving open access. There is a lot of studies going on. There is nowadays, for example, if you say today, there is around 35 different analyses of question be analyzed with the data. And these include some that already have the results. The result is coming. Some in process of publication, some are already published. For example, in leprosy, you have some studies published already. Here is coming next week. No, this week on Friday will be published in the Lancet Global or Lancet Infectious Diseases. It's a study showing, for example, the impact of the cash transfer on treatment adherence to leprosy. It's a very interesting analysis, yeah, and it was only possible to do this analysis, yeah, using the kind of data that we have. Yeah. Another is the final process of acceptance, incidence impact of the Cardiovascular program on leprosy incidence, yeah. That also was only possible using large set of data that we used, yeah. Studies on impact of post-familial childhood mortality, yeah, is underway, yeah. With very nice results, yeah. In fact, the paper is in final stage of the write-up, yeah. That show an effect of post-familial on infant mortality, yeah. And this effect is higher in the poorest municipality. You have a huge number, it's not a sample size problems, yeah, different from the normal studies, yeah, in houses that have samples and they have the sample limits and sample size limits. Here you don't have. Then you can stratify your data in different orders and see effects that saying that is not possible with normal data. For example, the impact of infant mortality, you see, you stratify the municipality by the Human Development Index of the municipality, yeah, and classify in 5 quintiles, and you see that in the lower quintile the effect is higher, and there is a clear dose response, yeah. The social programs is more effective in more poor municipalities, what in some way is expected, but it never has been demonstrated in this way. Yeah, you have with the Glasgow group, yeah, when you start to explore impact of social policy on cardiovascular disease. Yeah, this is a topic that in general is not explored at all. People in general thinking social protection linked with infant mortality or infant health or child health or infectious disease. And you explore with the impact on cardiovascular health. Yeah, in the first results is a very stimulating. Yeah, look like there is a important effect, yeah, on improvement on cardiovascular or decreasing cardiovascular mortality. Right. Well, you are using the same cohort to evaluate other programs. Yeah, there is a Maurício here. Maurício is one of the leading person on evaluated the Minha Casa Minha Vida. It's a housing program. Yeah, near 1.3 million houses since 2009 have been distributed for poor families in Brazil. And linking on housing health historically, yeah, since centuries, people think on that house is important for health. There is a lot of data showing or exploration of this question, but never was evaluated one program, an intervention program of this size. Yeah, there is a huge opportunity to evaluate. Then a lot of different outcomes. Yeah. Have been explored, involving infectious disease, cardiovascular disease, and the others, infant health or child health, etc. Here are examples of Minha Casa Minha Vida. Someone asked yesterday, I put this picture, yeah. You have houses, yeah. You have flats, yeah. There is different intervention, different things, yeah. But they follow some standards. Yeah, well, another program that you started to evaluate is the systems program. System is correct in English, or well, so yeah, there is I'm not always okay. The effect of systems, yeah, there is here in the Northeast region of Brazil, there is a very dry area. Gustavo talked about this in his presentation. There is an area where there is a lot of drought and the shortage in water. Then there was this intervention to build in this system that collected water during the rainy season, yeah, and accumulate water that the house can be using during the dry season. It's The intrusion protection, a very simple technology, and you are starting to evaluate the impact of that in different outcomes. But recently, you created your process of creating what you call in Cidacs burst cohort. Is another structure of linked data. Based on the conception of a burst cohort. Burst cohort is an important tool to study different aspects of health. Phil Cooper run a burst cohort in Ecuador to study, for example, allergy, others to study other things. And basically, the baseline of this cohort is put data from CNASC and data that describe the condition of the birth. And the cadastro único to take socioeconomic variables. Then you have a baseline of the cohort which near over 24 million kids. Then you can follow these 24 million kids. The basic conception is that that it can be followed for a long time. One of the studies that you're doing here is on Zika. It's a contract that you have the Ministry of Health of Brazil to study long-term effect of Zika. Then you are using this structure to assemble data and explore the effects that Zika infection, Zika epidemics in 2005, 2016 had in this population. But there is other question that can be explored. For example, some of the question that the group that's around this cohort start to explore. For example, the effect of cesarean section on maternal and child outcomes. That's a big issue. Brazil is a champion on cesarean section. There is a lot of evidence in the literature that cesarean section have effects on child and mother. But this will be explored in great details with a cohort like this one. And another thing that interests this debate that Cidacs is doing, don't have immediate relation to this cohort, is development of a deprivation measure for Brazil at census tract level. In fact, you are creating a huge geographical marker of deprivation in the country using very small units that are the census tract. Scotland, UK in general, but Scotland in particular, have a long tradition on development of deprivation index. We are doing that with the Scottish group. And the index is near development. It's a very simple index. Using basically these variables. These three variables that was extracted from the census. This was tested. There was a method of development of that. A lot of different measures. Was compared with this, and they resisted. They are very simple measurements possible. You don't need very complex and to use different variables. You can be very economic in your variables. And this well correlated. With the other ways of the measurements. Some characteristics of the deprivation index. You have compared this deprivation index with the others similar indicators that have been developed in Brazil. Not for all the country, but for example, Belo Horizonte, São Paulo have some census tract based index. And you compare with that. And you see that there is a very good correlation on the Brazilian the deprivation index developed here and the EVS, that is the index that was developed in Belo Horizonte. That's a more complex with more variables, but you see that there are very good correlation among them. With the São Paulo, also give a good, not so perfect as the mean, but give a good correlation. And this index have the advantage that it is developed to the census tract, but you have a similar measure on the municipal level. The census, it can be used in 2 levels. Yeah, for instance, if you want to see a national perspective, is better to be a national or a municipal level. If you want to see more details of a municipality, you can look at the census tract level. And at least you are doing some validation of this at the census tract, and you have the result here. But at the municipal level, yeah, you see it's well correlated, yeah, with different other measurements of social and health measurements. Some healthy outcome here, life expectancy, yeah, and under 1 infant mortality. You see that in general give a very strong correlation, yeah, with the index. Well, then this is what you're doing, yeah, only to have a flavor of what's going on. If someone have a question,
we have about 10 minutes or 15 minutes for questions, so if anyone has a question for Maurício. James.
First, a basic question: is the unit of solution is individual or household? Is the data at an individual level or household?
Individual level, any household, a family level. You have information on the family of the household, but you have individual data also. You have education is individual. Yeah. You have information on each individual of the family. Yeah. And you have information on the household, for example, that is a common information. Then you have these 2. You can easily work, yeah, with the 2 levels, yeah, family and the, yeah.
Maurício, what's the advantage of your deprivation index compared to the other indices that you showed?
Well, it's good because it's national, you know, because the others that exist at the census tract have been only sectorial, yeah. Belo Horizonte have developed one, yeah, local. Then our idea was to create a national index, yeah, that can be used in the north or south of Brazil, but the same index, yeah, then it's comparable sets, yeah. And Belo Horizonte developed the index for themselves. São Paulo have their own index for their own use, yeah. But there's no national index. No one have developed a national index at census tract level. At municipal level, we have some index in Brazil, but at municipal level, at census tract level, no.
I think the benefit of that as well is you can compare areas to the whole of Brazil. So you can compare an area in Salvador to how that fits in terms of deprivation to elsewhere in the entire country, or you could compare census tracts within Salvador just to other places within Salvador. So it allows you to compare and contrast in different geographies.
Just going back to the data, thank you for the presentation. So the 100 million Brazilian cohort, does that mean 100 million people in general, or 100 million households? Which
no,
would be a lot
100 million people.
So do you know how many households would be?
It's around, I can say use 3-4 people for
okay,
household
so
in India, 3, below 4, yeah. I don't have, but it's over 30 million families, yeah.
And they would have been qualified for this based on the income or the certain characteristics of the head of the household?
Yeah. They apply because they are asking for one of the social protection program. Don't mean that they got the program.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the application form. Yeah. The application form, based on this application, you apply for the program. Yeah. Nowadays, if you go to ask for each one, there is in Brazil now around 30 different programs, yeah, that are linked to the Cadastro Único. Yeah. Then if you apply for any of these programs, the selection process, or the analysis if you are or not eligible for the program is done with the data from the Cadastro Único.
Okay. sorry to be asking all these questions about the data, but so people knew about these were the potential programs that they would have been eligible for? Was it some sort of process that would have gone out to ask or to share information saying, hey, we're going to do this? It's an automatic sort of registration. Was there, I'm just trying to figure out what's that sort of background for people being eligible and people knowing about the potential programs?
No, people know about the programs. Yeah, sure. If you apply, for example, there is a limit of income for you to complete the program. Then you have the half poorest of the population, Brazilian population. But the guy know about the program. Yeah, the big motivation for the Cadastrónico is the cash transfer, the more popular program. Yeah, that people look more. Yeah. But you see there is different other programs that you can apply, and in general people know the program, and this generates some problems, related to selection.
Right.
It's not random,
Right, that's what I was
also the allocation is not random, because this you need to use methods, that they account for this process. It's not at all. I don't like it. I did around my trials in the text, but I don't think that for evaluation of social programs, random studies are the best way. Very artificial, random study. Then you rely more in using of natural experiment ideas, to try to see that, and you need to take care in account a lot of things. But for example, in the My House in My Life program, there is a stage of the program that is a lottery process, And then people who are doing the program, they are trying to get this lottery data, for at least part of the sample, to do a smaller randomized study, using the lottery distribution process,
But if you have, sorry, one last one. So if you're eligible for one program, it will mean that you're not eligible for any other program.
No. You can have two programs.
Oh, okay.
For example, 50% of people have housing, have also Bolsa Família, receive Bolsa Família. It's not, I don't know in detail to answer those, but in principle there is no limit. Then, for example, this structure you plan to do in the future, one thing that is there is not so much data in program evaluation. That is the interaction among programs. For example, when we study the housing program, you can later think who receive a Bolsa Família and the housing, the effect is improved or not. This is a question that
it's not
because in general program evaluation is done one by one. It's very only causal, and with this structure, you think that you can do interaction among programs.
I think we were talking about the my House, My Life program, especially in terms of the health effects and it having the houses being a bit more environmentally friendly and just offering better health outcomes. So it would be interesting, really, to test that interaction effect with Bolsa Família and other sort of.
This is one thing that you have potential to do that. You need to think your methods on a way to do that, but it's possible. With this structure.
I think there was another question.
Chris, a couple of things about work information. Do you have the places work? Do you have where people work?
I think not. Have the work the people, but not where people work.
Like the profession, but
no.
Do you know
it's limited, that you don't have any data. I'm a chef, because this will be, for example, travel distance for work and things. No. It's you have the employment, the occupation, but not the local, the address of the work.
And you were saying that this is basically the poorest half of the population, but how comprehensive is it on that poorest half?
How?
Are there is everyone who is below the median income level represented in one of these programs? Probably not. So do you know how, like,
How distributed
Yeah.
those below the poverty line are encapsulated?
It is, no, I can't answer this question, but given the spread of the program and the focalization of the program, you believe that this represent two things. One is the half poor of Brazilian, It's not obligatory, and then, but for example, from 2011, there was a huge effort because people observed that very poor population, and they are not included in this system, because it don't have address, a fixed address. It was very formal, the system. Then there was a huge effort, to include these people in the registration, what's called the very poor people, the people who are don't have information, don't have completely marginalized from the system. Then nowadays, great part of people is included. They classify for special population. For example, if you are indigenous, the indigenous population in Brazil, this is a very good source of information because this register, it's not only race or ethnic in general, but if you are indigenous and live in an original place, for example, you can have this data. There is an important population in Brazil of black population called quilombolas. Quilombolas are small units, small villages that was formed during the slavery process. That slavery that go out of the owners, and you organize themselves on a small village. This exists all over Brazil. And the main important source nowadays on the quilombola information, quilombola is the Cadastro Único. Then you can do a lot of analysis in such population, but it's not, you say it's 100 representative, not, yes, you say. But representation, great part of the studies are not representing anything, this idea of representation mathematically, statistically, is not fulfilled by great part of the investigation. Our generalization are based in other things, But by the numbers, and the spread of the information, you have a very, very interesting information all over Brazil. But it's not the complete population. I don't know if the census have the complete population, but the only source of the complete population is the census. But for example, the birth data that we have here is from all over the population. Then you can see things, the characteristic of birth of the population that is in this compared with some of others, that's not included in this. Then you can do a lot of checks, to see how generalizable the limits of this population.
Have you tried to do some of those checks? Do you know, for example, how much poorer the population in the database is relative to the total population? How much like the family, how much more rural?
People is doing that. There is a lot of complementary analysis, to try to understand their data,
So we are now going to have a presentation from Sefi Roth. He is going to do a Zoom presentation, but I think he's not on just yet. So,
Did you email him?
yeah, his presentation is scheduled for like in 4 minutes. So I think he's just like taking a couple of minutes to so yeah, just gonna wait 2 or 3 minutes till he's online. Yeah, I think it's gonna end now at 10, but it's 3 to 10, so it's gonna wait like 2 minutes.
You don't have the contact to him?
I just talked to him. He said he's going to do that.
You'll probably see when he joins.
Yeah.
Because if you delay, Ross is connected. Ross can start and then you come later.
Yeah. Is it working?
I can't see the presentation.
Is that Ross?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't see it.
There
I
is
just see the Cilliers page.
there isn't any presentation on at the moment, so
Oh, I see. Okay.
yeah, so that's fine.
Do we get to stop share or? Yeah, so actually, so when Ross, when Sefi comes on, we'll see it.
Yeah, so we can wait until 10. If it doesn't come on, perhaps Ross can start.
So Ross, we're going to wait till 10 to see if Sefi connects, and then if he doesn't, do you mind giving your talk at 10? The microphone.
Your
Your
microphone is off.
Unmute your mic.
You can unmute him.
Yes, that's all right, Phil. Right now, though, I don't see anything, so I hope it's working here.
So we can see you.
Yeah. And then you're going to just so you can start. Hi, Sefi. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. How are you?
I'm fine, great. So yeah, let me just introduce you. So this is Sefi, Dr. Sefi Roth, Assistant Professor at the London School of Economics, Department of Geography and the Environment, and is going to be having this presentation on using satellite-based measures of air pollution in imperial work. So do you think you can share your presentation, Sefi?
That's what I'm going to try and do. So give me a second. First of all, thank you very much, guys. I hope that you are having fun there, even though that I'm not there. But let me...
So there is a button, like a share,
At the bottom of the screen.
So the bottom, in the middle of the screen, there should be a green button.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What can you see now?
Yes,
we
you
see
can
it.
see your screen.
Perfect.
Screen. I'm just wondering which one.
We see all.
Can you see the presentation now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay. How much time do I have?
You have 20 minutes.
20 minutes. Okay, so let me dive straight into the subject. So today I'm going to talk about a satellite-based measure of air quality in empirical work. Let me start by giving you a little bit of motivation. Why do I think it's important? So there are numerous studies that examine the impact of air pollution on a variety of different outcomes, and let me summarize the literature. Air pollution is not good for you. Some of these studies, more specifically, some of these studies look at health. So there is lots of evidence that high exposure to air pollution lead to worse health outcomes, including infant mortality, hospital admission, and visits to A&E. More recently, more literature suggests that air pollution also affects other aspects of human life, including labor productivity, human capital, cognitive performance, and so on. And very recently, even that air pollution affects crime and road safety. Now, the common feature to all of these studies, and it's kind of how I relate this to today's topic, is that they all rely on pollution data from measuring stations on the ground. And two main questions that comes to mind when you think about it for a bit is, one, how reliable are these readings? And I'm going to spend some time talking about that. And second, what can we do when we don't have monitoring stations? Something that happens quite often in mainly in developing countries, but not just. So what can we do when we don't have the luxury, so to speak, of having measuring sessions? So let me start by touching on the first kind of question that I had in mind, is how reliable are these readings? So in terms of reliability, I think that there are two main concerns here that are somewhat correlated. The first one is what I call, and others call, the endogenous location of monitoring stations. So what do I mean by that? Monitoring stations are not randomly assigned across space and time. Governments and local authorities decide where to put these monitoring stations based on a variety of reasons, including, for example, where there is more pollution or where there is more population. So if we just get data from this monitoring station, maybe we get a subsample of the population, of the exposure of the population. Okay. So this is kind of first issue that I think may have implication to empirical work with measuring station. Or using data from measuring station. The other thing is something that is more recent development, I think, and this is due to the development of satellite data, which kind of came across, and this is what we call unwatched pollution. And recent papers highlight the issue of data manipulation. So there are two papers here that I referenced to. The first one is by Microbes and others. It's not published paper, it's a work in progress paper that look at the consequences of the automation of air pollution monitoring of monitors in China as part of the war on pollution. And what they found in this paper is that reported airborne particles, PM10, concentration increased by around 40% immediately after you introduce these automated measuring stations. And that, to me and to the author, suggests that there is some kind of manipulation at the local authority level of how they and when they report pollution. And in fact, they kind of try to look at a correlation between these cities that, experience this kind of massive sudden increase in reported pollution. They saw this highly linked to corruption in these cities. So this is kind of a big issue. This is in China. The second paper by Eric Zhu, it's forthcoming in the American Economic Review. And what this paper does, it kind of documents a local strategic response to a cyclical, once every 6-day air quality monitoring schedule in the United States under the Federal Clean Air Act. And they use satellite data of areas that are being monitored, and they show that air quality is significantly higher during unmonitored days. So they didn't have to monitor, according to the regulation, didn't have to monitor the pollution level every day, only some days, and they saw that when they don't monitor, pollution actually go up quite a lot. So that also suggests that there is some kind of manipulation, or either by a local authority or by potentially just shifting of polluting activity across time, which I don't know if it's something that we actually want to have. So this is kind of in terms of reliability. The second question is, sometimes we just don't have data on monitoring stations. So what can we do? What are the alternatives? So one good solution for that is to use satellite-derived data. One very good solution for that is this source that I mentioned here, Van Dunkler and others that measure PM2.5 concentration around the world. So this data, I'm going to show you some of this data later on today, but this data is available for the entire world. So you can get data on the US, but also Brazil, India, etc. And what this kind of data does, it's sort of free analysis. It combines satellite data from AOD with ground monitoring data, some photometer, and also some kind of diffusion model. I'm going to show you, if you wonder how good this data is, I'm going to show you some examples from my own work, and you can judge for yourself. This This is by no means the only source of satellite data. I was in a conference in Maastricht in November, and there was a guy there from Airbus, and he showed us this kind of their product from Airbus, and this is an example of NO2 emission in India. As you can see, their data is so good that they can actually attribute the emission for a specific firm, a specific facility. I haven't worked with this data yet, but this is something that is available. Again, it's global data, so this is in India, and the next slide is just going to be in Nepal, and you can get it for pretty much everywhere that you want. This is, for example, again, NO2 emission for a cement factory. This is a very recent development. I think it's still, again, work in progress. But to me, that kind of showed the next level of data that we'll be able to get. And the first thing that springs to mind when I see this kind of data, that is potentially going to be a great thing for government in terms of auditing and enforcing pollution regulation, if we can actually observe individual facility or firm. Again, I've never worked with this data. I haven't verified that. I worked with the Van Dankler one, as I'm going to show you in just a slide or two. But I think that there are many other promising products out there in case you guys are interested. Happy to talk to you about it also. I'm going to use a paper of mine in order to kind of show you what can you do with satellite data. And let me tell you about this paper a bit. So this is a joint paper with Felipe Carozzi, also from LSE. And what we try to do in this paper is to look at the causal relationship between air quality, between air pollution and population density in the United States. Let me give you motivation, kind of why do we care about that. So as of 2014, 54% of the world population live in urban areas, and this figure is projected to reach 66% by 2050. A large body of literature, mainly in urban economics, has examined the consequences of urbanization and provides strong evidence that an increase in density is associated with welfare and enhancing agglomeration effects, supporting activity. And some research also suggested that denser areas are associated with lower greenhouse gas emission, suggesting that more compact cities are greener. And that led to kind of this notion among many urban planners that denser cities are good for the environment. However, even if this is the case on the CO2 front, an increase in density is potentially also associated with strong congestion forces such as air pollution, which is something that never been studied before until this study. Now, the relationship between air pollution and density is ambiguous. Why? Well, high density may lead to lower emission as people change their behavior. For example, they may drive less or drive shorter distances, and which means that we're just going to have less emission per capita. So that's why it suggests a negative relationship between the two. High density, as I said before, lead to to agglomeration, more economic activity. More economic activity normally lead to higher level of pollution. Again, so here we have a positive relationship between the two. Sorry. And finally, and I think this is kind of a very interesting channel, which people sometimes fail to kind of fully capture. So even if emission per capita go down, the fact that we have more people concentrated in one area means that even though total emission is lower, pollution exposure per individual might be actually higher. Just because of the fact that people are more concentrated next to each other. So, this is a great empirical work. We don't know the direction of this relationship, so we're going to try to find what it is. And why do we care? Well, because you know that air pollution is bad for you. And second, well, we can potentially influence urban planning, so we can potentially also deal with air pollution. So our objective for this paper is to get this kind of what we call reduced form estimate on the link between density and pollution, and also try to quantify the mortality health costs which are associated with that. Two main challenges. One is to get a causal estimate between air pollution and density. There are many other factors that are actually going to be correlated with both. People decide where they want to live on a variety of factors, including pollution itself. So we're going to have to think about some clever statistical way to avoid what we call the heterogeneity concern. And the second thing, which is probably why I'm mentioning the paper, is how we actually going to measure pollution. So let me tell you what we did here. One, in terms of measuring pollution, we're going to use the satellite-derived PM2, PM2.5 concentration from Van Dunkelen as our main measure of air pollution. We're also going to use data from the monitoring station, the EPA monitoring station on the ground. I'm going to compare these two for you to see. In terms of the heterogeneity concern, to make sure that we get causal link, I'm not going to talk about that today. But for those of you that want to know, it's in the paper, but pretty much we're talking about IV. Here, instrument of variable, we're going to use geological instrument to induce exogenous variation in density without affecting pollution directly. And the nice thing about using this satellite data, we can do this empirical analysis at two different levels. One, within cities, so we can look whether denser areas inside a city have higher pollution level. And second, we can look at between cities. Okay. The richness of the data allow us to do the within city analysis, which I think is very interesting. So I mentioned we're going to use PM2.5. I don't know if you know what is PM2.5. In case you haven't seen PM2.5 or never heard about PM2.5, it's a term that used to describe a mixture of solid particles and liquid droplets in the air. At 2.5, it's basically corresponds to the size of the particles. I'm talking about particles that are less than 2.5 microns diameter. So it's something very small. If you see this kind of diagram or picture from the EPA, the gray thing here is just a human hair. Each one of those blue dots is PM10, so it's larger than PM2.5. It's 10 microns in diameter, and within each one of these blue dots here, or circles, you have this purple, or whatever it is, circles which are PM2.5. So PM2.5 are extremely tiny particles that you cannot see with the naked eye. Now, that has two implications, broadly speaking. One, it has more severe health effect because it just managed to penetrate the body better, and also it can penetrate the indoor environment. So people kind of really care about PM2.5 at the moment. Numerous studies show that, again, particulate matter, PM10 and PM2.5 are bad for the environment. Are bad for the health. Like asthma, mortality, and many other things. These are just some examples that I took from the US EPA website, but again, there is a huge literature on that. Okay, so let's talk about the data that I use in this paper. I'm going to look at 2000, 2010, because this is when I have data on population from the census, the US Census. And the data that I'm going to use is the North American file from Van Dunkelen. To the best of my knowledge, this data is available from 1998. I heard some rumors that soon it's going to be available from the 1980s, but this is yearly level data on pretty much across the globe, and we're going to use the data for 2000 to 2010. We're also going to use data for the EPA monitoring station on the ground to show you some robustness data on, as I mentioned before, on population density counts on the census, and we use other data or other reasons. Right, so let me jump straight into some of the things that we can say about the data. First thing that we did is to kind of verify how good this satellite data is. And this is, I think, a very interesting exercise. So what we did here, we compared the reading of PM2.5 PM2.5 from the monitoring station. So every time that we have a grid on our map with a monitoring station that actually measure PM2.5, we treat that as the true value of PM2.5 at this specific time. And we compare that to what the satellite data tell us. And the correlation between these two readings, where we have the readings, when we have these readings, is just above 0.8. So we're talking about a very, very square, very, very high correlation between the readings, which make us comfortable using this data. Just to mention, this is just for the United States. We haven't verified that elsewhere. And if you want to use this data elsewhere, I would suggest you to follow exactly the same exercise that we did here in order to verify the suitability of this data for your own research and for the country that you are looking at. Just in terms of how the data look like and what's going on, this is how we assemble our own data. And this is just an example. We look at this twin city of Minneapolis and St. Paul. So the first figure is just a satellite photograph of these twin cities. When you see the Mississippi crossing here, the urban area from the northwest to the southeast. This is our pollution raster. Okay, this is the data from the Department of Health. This is actually what you get, where with darker shades indicate higher PM2.5 concentration. And this is the monitoring station. This is the EPA monitoring station that we have. This is actually a good case. And you can see here, it's less than ideal. We don't have the same resolution. This is, the United States. This is actually a good example in a big city in the United States. You have some monitoring station here, but it's not even comparable to the richness of the data that we have from the satellite data. So this is that. This is just the data in terms of the population data that we have, which is less interesting for you, I guess. And this is the final data that we have. This is the grid that we use. This is the level of pollution that we have here. Okay, so we can get very, very fine resolution, which is going to be very helpful. Okay. Now, before I show you the results, let me show you how the within city distribution of both population and pollution. First, this is kind of 2 3D maps for population density and PM2.5 concentration around Minneapolis. The left panel here showed that population density has 2 clear peaks, if you can see here, corresponding to the core of both cities. Note that we also observe the same peaks in the right panel, which display PM2.5 concentration. So that to me indicated there is already kind of spatial correlation between pollution density within cities. And I think the most interesting thing for this presentation is to see how we can actually map these cities, the within city distribution of pollution. This is incredible, I would say. The second thing that I would like to show you, and I think this is very, very important actually, let's look at the left-hand side first. And what I show you here, this is just the distance gradient for both population density and PM2.5 concentration using data for all cities. This is for the entire US. And what we have here, the blue line is the residential density, the PM2.5 is the dashed red line here. And we observe the kind of usual downward sloping density gradient that characterizes more cities. So when you move away from the core of the city, you see population density go down. And interestingly, you also see that, well, potentially not surprising, that PM2.5 also go down a lot. Now, and this is important, if you look on the right figure, this is exactly the same exercise as the one on the left, but here we just use the monitoring station. And if you look at the scale of the axis pretty well, or closely, you see that it's actually a very, very different level. You see that first, we have much higher population density, and second, we see a much higher level of air pollution, which to me suggests, we can argue about that monitoring stations, at least in the United States, are located where we have higher level of pollution and where we have higher population density. So using monitoring station, people think this is kind of the best thing to do, but what this potentially suggests that we might miss out many, many places And that's potentially going to give us some kind of, not going to give us the full picture. Because don't forget, for the satellite data, we have the entire US. We don't have any area which is not available to us. Finally, the results, if you're interested, we find a positive link between density and population exposure. Our preferred IV estimate, empirical estimate, suggests that there is an elasticity of 0.13 between density, exposure, and between density and pollution exposure. And we also estimate the health cost. I didn't really talk about that, but we found that doubling density in the city of the United States, which is the equivalent of changing population density in Houston to the one of Chicago, lead to mortality health cost of up to $724 per capita, which is this is just the mortality cost, which is huge. We also kind of look at what's the saving from CO2, as I mentioned in the beginning of the talk, and the saving from that would be around $52. So it's very, very different. Which kind of raised the question whether compact cities are actually green or not. So I think I ran out of time 3 minutes ago, but this is kind of the conclusion that I have. One, reliable data on air pollution is crucial for academics, for us that want to study that, but also for policymakers that either want to make sure that their policies are being met, and also to study things that we are interested in. Rich data for monitoring station is publicly available in some countries, in many others, so we can look for other alternatives. Satellite data is the way forward, at least in my view, and this is something that is available for all countries, and we see better and better products nowadays. And I think that the future, as I kind of mentioned before, is enforcement using satellite data for policy. So this is all I had to say, and I don't know what's next, but thank you very much for listening.
Great, thank you, Sefi. Any questions? Question. Can you hear as well?
Microphone on.
Sefi?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, say again.
Can you hear as well? Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you, yes.
Okay. So there is a question here for you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that the question? But in Brazil, we have particular conditions of climate and atmospheric pollution. For instance, sometimes the Amazon region has more is more polluted than even São Paulo,
Right.
in industrial areas because of the forest fires. So I would like to highlight this region because it's people are very, very vulnerable there. Most people are poor and far from the cities. They live along the rivers.
Yeah.
No large cities, and a lot of moisture. Sometimes, many times clouds. So this satellite estimates of PM 2.5 must be evaluated, but must be like you did in comparing this
The rock station. Yeah.
gauging stations with satellite response. I think we must focus on must study this region. I think people from EPIC can help us. Another region very, very interesting is semi-arid area here close to Salvador, which is dry, very dry, and many respiratory diseases, but maybe caused by other factors,
Right.
and industrial areas. So, and maybe Ecuador, which is influenced by Pacific, and there's other completely different climate. So we must study this
Differences.
because I don't know if the universal general model can have the same.
Yeah. Very cloudy.
I guess.
Yeah.
Could you hear it?
I think so. So we're talking about the accuracy
Yeah.
given different kind of climatic conditions, right?
Yeah.
Right, and clouds as well. So if you could say something
Yeah.
about it, the
Of
reliability.
course, and also he mentioned forest fires, if
Yeah.
I'm correctly. So I think, yeah, I mean, these are great points, and thank you for highlighting because I completely forgot to talk about it. Yeah, so there are some limitations about, using satellite data in certain contexts. For example, if you think about how actually this satellite data work, well, you need to get kind of a clear sky in order for to get a reading. So if you have lots of cloud cover, for example, we're not going to be able to get a good reading from the satellite. That might be an issue for some countries if you want to get data on the daily level. But if you're looking at something more aggregated, for example, monthly or yearly, I think that, and this is why one of the reasons why we use the yearly data before. I think that these data sets are more reliable because we don't necessarily count on a specific day, which might have some cloud cover which prevent pollution to be read from satellite. The point about forest fire, that obviously it can complicate things, and there are lots of analysis on that. But yeah, so this is a great point. The last thing, and I mentioned that, and I think that in the presentation, and I think that you also mentioned it now. The data that I used in this specific study was for the US, and I verified, it's not just data from satellite, it's reanalysis, so you also use from monitoring station on the ground and some model. So I verified the data for the United States specifically. Again, if you want to use these data sets for other parts, I strongly encourage you to first verify, if you have some measuring station, it doesn't have to be like 100, but if you have even 12, 14, see when you have reading from this data, from these measuring stations, and try to see the correlation between what satellites tell you and what you have on the ground, to kind of do a sanity check to make sure that you're using, good data.
Great. Any other
Yes.
question? Yeah, sure.
So just a short remark. In this northeast region of Brazil, we have mostly inorganic dust. In the Amazon, during the forest fires, the dust, some people call it black carbon,
Right.
completely organic. And in the industrial areas, another kind of, what I'm, this organic carbon is very, very allergenic. Allergen, yeah.
And so perhaps you wonder if there are differences depending on the
Yeah.
type of pollution
Confusion.
and how
Composition
what the satellite can
yeah.
capture.
How, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is that, as I said, PM2.5 is almost like a catch-all pollutant, so it catches different type of, the composition of PM2.5 can vary by different places, and you mentioned one of them. Black carbon, black carbon should be, to the best of my knowledge, part of PM2.5, and it should be captured, I would say, by satellite data. So the way that it actually works, the AOD, is basically it compares the intensity of solar radiation at the top of the atmosphere with how much radiation is reflected by the Earth's surface. So the more airborne particles, whatever it may be, they are to scatter and observe this kind of this radiation, the less radiation is reflected back to the satellite, back to space. So maybe different type of particle will slightly affect the ability to measure and analyze the data at the satellite, but I think that the models nowadays are pretty good that they can do a very decent job with that. But again, the only way to verify that is to actually try in specific geographies and see what you get. But it's a great point.
Right, so we have one last question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ms. Roth, may I ask a question?
Oh, Ben.
Yeah, that's Ross.
Please.
Oh, Sefi, what are your views on using satellite measures of nitrogen dioxide?
Look, so the only thing that I use is PM2.5. I haven't used anything else. Sorry that I can't be more helpful than that. And the only thing that, again, I'm repeating myself, the only thing that I would suggest is to kind of look at the source of the data, look at something that we have on the ground, and look at the correlation, see how good it is. Also with PM2.5, I tried different products, actually, there's more than one, and some of them were absolutely awful. I'm not going to name and shame. But I found almost no correlation with what's happening on the ground. So it's hard for me to, comment on that. Sorry if I wasn't very helpful.
Okay, so I have a last question.
Hi, Seth. I've been playing with this data, this satellite data for PM2.5, and on the website I checked. I mean, they have two sets of data. One is just PM2.5. I mean, it's the whole PM2.5, and the other one is excluding dust and sea salt. And I wonder which one you've been using. If you have any recommendations in terms of which one is best for.
I use the one that capture all.
All right. For any reason, or just because you have to choose one?
I mean, if you want to send me an email, I can send you the exact file that I used. I know that they have quite a few, so I'm happy to send you the exact file. But it's the one for North America, which include all of the. I don't have it in front of me right now, but again, if you send me an email, I'll send you the exact file.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a quick one?
Yeah, I think the process is not.
Sefi, one quick question. When you just did a simple correlation between the ground data and the satellite, or did you do some sort of weighting mechanism between pixel and point?
First and again?
Did you do a weighting mechanism between the pixel and point, or was it a simple correlation?
It's just like a simple correlation. So we basically, what we did, we look at pixels in which we have monitor station. Yeah, and we saw what's the monitor station on the ground tells us. And we look at very, very just simple correlation, at this specific grid that we have data from the satellite, obviously. What's the correlation between the two? That's it.
Right. Okay, thanks a lot, Sefi. Thank you. And
Thank you very much.
Feel free to stay around a little bit if you have time. So the next one, we are going to have a presentation from Ross Anderson. He is at the St. George's University of London and also King's College London. And the presentation will be on air pollution asthma. So an update of evidence for this year. So thank you, Ross.
It's a pleasure. Now, do I click share screen, do I?
Yes. So then we'll be able to see your screen. Yes, we can see it here.
Look, you need to open your presentation. Yeah, you put a slide in the screen, then.
You want me to open the presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
So you.
I see from one of my files.
So your file, you open your presentation, then you select the screen with the presentation.
So how do I? So I just need to go into. Let's see.
So you'll be able to control the slides and.
Okay. I've got it on my desktop here. Okay, so now I've opened it.
Yeah, and then you can share your screen.
Okay, oh, okay. Let me get back into the Zoom. I can't, I've opened the presentation.
Yes, and now you click on share.
I can't, the Zoom file, I get still is,
it worked before when you share your screen.
right, you saw my presentation.
I saw your screen before at some point.
No,
What
not
can you-
now.
Yeah.
Not
Not
now.
now,
You're
not
not
anymore.
sure yet. If you can send to us, I can project from here. Yeah, if you send an email or you share your.
Can you see my presentation now?
No.
If you go to Zoom, do you have the Zoom open on your screen right now?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear you.
Do
Sorry.
you have Zoom open on your screen right now?
I have the presentation open.
Okay, so if you go to Zoom, to where you can see us.
I can't see you at all. I haven't been able to see you.
Yeah, if you go to the screen where you can see Priscilla's name.
Yes.
Right, perfect.
No.
I just got a little black box with Priscilla Riviero on it.
Perfect, perfect. So now if you can click on shares.
No, it's just, there's nothing there.
If you just scroll down with the mouse,
you'll see
the
in the
screen,
back.
that's share screen option.
I was worried about this. I seem to not.
If you move your mouse around, you'll see in the base of your screen, yeah, in the bottom of your screen, a green light share.
Yeah, I've lost that presentation. I've lost that screen. I know what you mean. I
Russ,
think.
Russ, would you mind to that Phil does a presentation now? And are you staying with us in the morning, during the morning?
So yes,
So-
I've been
so
with
perhaps-
you,
perhaps
but I
we
seem
could-
to have
perhaps-
lost. I'm just running it again.
Perhaps we could do that Phil does a presentation now and then we have a break and then I can work
Okay,
out with you
I've got the
your
screen now.
presentation.
I've just reinstalled it now.
Oh yeah, have you seen the share button, the green button?
Yeah, button, yes.
Yeah, and then you press in share.
Yes.
Then you choose you see several screens in your, you choose it, here.
Okay.
Okay, now
No.
here's the, no, instead I think you select the wrong screen.
Okay.
We are seeing your windows.
Yeah, you see your
So perhaps
Share again. Tell me to share again.
yeah, you need to stop sharing, then share again. And the same thing, the same procedure, but you need to stop sharing first.
Okay.
Yeah, stop sharing the red one. The red one.
I'm just going to.
So I think it would work better if so Phil could do the presentation now. We have a break, and then you send me your presentation. I can pass it through here.
But I already sent you my presentation.
For whom email? For Phil?
You have the presentation.
But I received Maurício, or what email did you send?
I sent it to Priscilla and to Phil.
Phil, okay.
Okay. Now I've got the screen. So there we go. Click on the green button.
Yeah, and then you see sometimes depends on what is open in your computer. Yeah, everything that's open appear. Then you need to move to select the screen where is your presentation. Yeah, sometimes appear several small screens. Yeah, then you can move around and select one that is in press. Yeah, click there.
Select a window or an application that you want to share.
Yeah. Yes.
And then it says basic, advanced, or files. So do I open a file? Well,
Ross, could you email me your presentation?
Sorry?
Could you email me your presentation? I didn't get it.
Oh, I did email it. This is it's Phil.
Yeah, that's me. Right.
Yeah, no problem. I didn't send it to you.
I seem to have lost it.
Okay, well I'll do that right now.
Don't get worried about it. It's really fine. Just
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
I like that.
Qualidade aqui.
I have time. I was telling you. He's like, yeah, do this.
It's gonna get stamped.
Okay, I'll send it.
Yeah, Ross, I've got it.
Média anual, né? Então eles põem, por exemplo, pode ser um fixo ali, que é uma média do ano todo. Então, claro que eu
I'll have to make the talk really quick now.
Don't worry about it. We have a lot of time.
I need to remember. That's what I don't mind.
They're just taking a bit of a while to download your presentation, Ross.
It's not huge.
Yes, it's really important. Should I find
Eles têm uns artigos falando da qualidade. Tecnicamente a gente não pode mudar cada grau, só duas estações. Então, onde tem mais estações, o dado vai ser mais preciso. Onde tem menos estações, vai ser mais preciso.
¿Hace cuánto? Como 15 minutos para ir. El shopping al aeropuerto como... Vuelos acá hasta medianoche.
Bota o monitor lá, aí e ele vai alimentando essa base e você vem lá. E eu tenho que continuar. A gente achou várias estações. É que a gente estava focando lá, que era o trabalho. Você não tem esse poder. Aproveitar. Sei que o colega aí está querendo fazer uma análise da história das queimadas lá no o aumento da...
No, ellos estaban viendo...
dos respiratórios.
Sí, es mismo para mí. Me gusta lo del café.
Aí a apresentação dele, quem está colocando?
Ela já mandou.
Some slightly animated, so just pick one. So, okay, well, I'm glad you've had a break to relax, which is more than I have had in this 5 or 10 minutes. Anyway, I'm really happy to be able to join you, and I'm going to talk about a subject that I could talk about all day, and I'll try and do it in 15 minutes. And the first, next slide please. A simple model here, the natural history of asthma, in which you have genetic and environmental factors. Click again.
Next.
So there, that's right. Oh, oops, no.
Sorry.
Yeah. There are two aspects here, and Phil mentioned this yesterday. There's the initiation of the underlying disease, and there's the exacerbation of existing asthma. Next slide, please. My first research was investigating chronic lung disease in the highlands of Papua New Guinea many years ago, nearly 50 years ago actually. And the people there live in huts with no chimneys, no windows, and they're reliant on wood fires inside for cooking and keeping warm. You can see the picture there. So a question I could ask you is, what would you think the prevalence of asthma is in this population? You don't have to answer, but could I have the next slide? This is what I found in a survey of 3,000 people in this population. The prevalence of asthma in children is 0 and of adults very low. And so basically, it's a good starting point for this talk, because what it tells us is that the air pollution is not to cause asthma. Next slide, please. Now, epidemiologists try to look at associations by looking at data which shows variations in the exposure and the health outcome. And in the case of asthma and air pollution, there are two main techniques. One is to look at variations over time, and that includes investigation of air pollution or asthma episodes, time series studies, and trends perhaps over a longer period of time, such as seasonal patterns and even years. Then we also look at variations in space within and between communities and over longer periods of time. Next slide, please. So I'll go straight to the summary of the results, and then I'll just flesh out a couple of these components. Firstly, there's seasonal variations that are not caused by air pollution variations. When you get asthma, when you get seasonal variations, they're usually due to the spread of respiratory viruses, particularly in school children. The evidence for air pollution episodes causing asthma is very mixed, and generally, if there is an effect or an association, then it's very small. But when you have asthma epidemics, they're nearly always due to aeroallergens, not to air pollution. And then we have panel studies, and there's some evidence for an association, but there's a lot of variation between individual studies. Meta-analysis suggests about an under 5% increase in symptoms or medication use. And then we have administrative health data, hospital data, primary care data. Meta-analysis again suggests significant but often very modest increases associated with a lot of heterogeneity. And lastly, with mortality, we know very little. Asthma deaths in children are rare, and in older deaths, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease confuses the situation. So a couple of illustrations of these points. The next slide, please. This is a meta-analysis of panel studies of children by Gudrun Weinmeier, and the thing that strikes you is that there's a lot of variability, the variation in whether positive, negative, and of course the error depending a lot on the sample size. And when you do the combined estimates, you come down to quite a small proportion. And we do meta-analyses in this situation because it increases the precision of your estimate, but it also invites you to understand why there is heterogeneity, and this is, I think, a very important point. And just on the right-hand side, you can see the actual percentage change, the relative risk of various pollutants, and these are quite, as you can see. Next slide, please. There are loads of studies looking at hospital admissions and relating this to daily variations in air pollution. This slide shows the results of a very exhaustive worldwide study carried out by Richard Atkinson and colleagues. And these are some of the, these are all individual meta-analyses listed here. And I mean, what it shows is that the air pollution is associated with increases in a lot of different outcomes, cardiovascular and respiratory. Right at the bottom, you've got asthma, which we talked about today. And yes, that's increased, but it's only a 2% increase. And it's fairly significant. That was based probably on about 20 studies. And Richard, quoting from the conclusions in the paper, he draws attention to the consistency of evidence for associations PM2.5, but makes a big point about the heterogeneity and it's quite marked. The different regions in the world have different summary estimates. So next slide, please. Here's from the same group by Inga Mills, associations with nitrogen dioxide. And again, there seems to be clear evidence of positive associations, but not shown in the slide is the heterogeneity. Take my word for it. There's a lot of heterogeneity, and so it's very difficult to make sense of heterogeneity. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to touch on people tend to think much in terms of biomedical mechanisms, and the way I like to look at it is that in this slide we've got time against physiological reserve in, say, an asthmatic patient or even a population of asthmatics. And so as you go up the vertical axis, you get less and less, say, pulmonary reserve, less lung function reserve. And there's a point of loss of reserve when you start getting symptoms. You might be short of breath, or you might go for a general practitioner, you might be in the hospital. The threshold will vary. But the thing is that underneath, for say someone with asthma, you've got a fluctuation in this reserve. And a lot of this is going on subclinically. Can I have the next, press again? That's it. So what I'm suggesting is that air pollution adds a small increment to the loss of reserve. It's a small marginal effect, and it's, if you like, it's one more straw on the camel's back. Click again, please. So in this particular case, nothing happens in terms of what we can measure as epidemiologists. There's been no threshold, hasn't gone through the threshold for a change in the clinical state. Next one. This would be an added event that wouldn't have occurred otherwise, and it's just taken that little bit extra to put it through the threshold. And then the last one, click again. And this would be an event brought forward in time. And so this is a way of trying to interpret what happens when we look at increases in hospital admissions or any other clinical event associated with air pollution. And the point I really want to make is don't lose sight of the underlying vulnerability, because it may have more to do with whether you get an association than the toxicity of the air pollution. Next slide, please. Then we have the long-term exposure studies, and trend data. We have good data from the UK, and we found no convincing association. I'll show you that in a minute. Then we have the issue of studies that are between communities, comparing cities or separate communities. And then we've got within community studies, which are mainly influenced by traffic pollution. And the thing is that the between community studies evidence is really null, and I'll show you an example for that in a minute. And there are very few incidence studies, and most of them are period prevalence studies. Please excuse my voice, I've caught coronavirus of some description at the moment, but I think I'll make it. And then within community studies, there are many of these, and meta-analysis usually finds significant associations with both incidence and prevalence. So there's the beginnings of a paradox here. Next slide, please. Here we have a slide that shows all of the prevalence studies of asthma that have been done in the UK at 2 points of time. And you can see generally, until the recent years, that the prevalence of asthma has increased over this time, roughly by 50%. Next one, please. If we look at what's happened to pollution in the UK, there's been an amazing several orders of magnitude increase in black smoke and sulfur dioxide. And so this is a very crude way of saying, well, there doesn't seem to be much association between trends in air pollution and trends in asthma, unless it's a negative association. So that's all I want to say about that. Next slide, please. There's nothing about spatial studies. Now, these can be done at different levels. On the left, we have a pollution map with the UK on a 1.1 kilometre model, and I'll show you some epidemiological results in relation to that in a minute. And then on the top right, we have London. Now, this is a 20 by 20 metre dispersion model, and I'll show you some results from that. And then we have the global picture, and these are the this is the von Dankler satellite measurements, but modified to some extent. And I'll give you some results from that. Next slide, please. So here you have probably heard of the ISAC study, and each of these stars is a sample of 3,000 13 to 14-year-old children who were given a self-complete questionnaire class. And this gave us, using a standardized questionnaire, a measure of of asthma in all of these centres. There are something like 18 countries and 120, I don't remember exactly, but there are many. And so what we've done is look at that in relation to satellite-based measures of PM2.5, nitrogen dioxide, and modelled ozone. Next slide, please. So this was published some time ago, 2012, and as I said before, we used the Mike Brower and von Dankler's work, and also some nitrogen dioxide from someone at Harvard. Okay, next one. So the first result is, this is the difference in prevalence per 100 children per increase in pollution within country, between centre. Next one. And the result is basically null for PM2.5 and nitrogen dioxide, and negative for ozone. Ozone was based on a model from Marcus Ammon in IASA. Next one. ISAC was repeated after 7 years, so it gave us an opportunity to look at the relationship between trends in air pollution and trends in asthma. Next one. And again, so this is the relationship between the change in air pollution and change in asthma, and it's negative, non-significant for PM2.5, and it's negative for ozone. We don't have anything for nitrogen dioxide. I suppose the message is that there isn't any evidence of a positive association. Next slide, please. We took the ISAC data for the UK for a study of 93 schools in the UK, and each of these schools had it was mixed, a mixed school. We took one from every borough and county borough in the country. And we related that to a model on a 1 kilometre square resolution from John Stedman's group. And so what we have here are the results of PM10, nitrogen dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and ozone with a threshold and without a threshold. And as you can see, there's not a significant association with any of these pollutants. And I should say that these sort of ecological studies need power, and we've had plenty of power because we have 93 schools, and the unit of analysis is the community or the school, not the number of kids who are in the study. Next paragraph, so this is a meta-analysis of PM10 and the period prevalence of asthma in what I've called multi-community studies, and with more than 4 communities. And there are studies from all over the world, including famous Harvard study, Dockery, et al., Peters, Southern California study, Japan, Germany, and so on. And the results here are comprehensively null for PM10. Next one, please. Here we are, odds ratio 1, nitrogen dioxide 1, ozone 1.01, and sulfur dioxide 1.02. I sent this paper to an American journal, and it was rejected within 24 hours. So, but we finally got it published. But I'll come to the question of publication bias in a minute. So this these sorts of results determined WHO guideline policies, the global burden of disease with which I was involved. Could not estimate the burden of asthma due to air pollution because of these kinds of results. Next slide, please. Then we come to the within the city, and here is London. This is the 20 by 20 metre dispersion model. Next one. And these are very, very difficult from an epidemiological point of view. At the bottom there, what we're showing is that the Londoners are exposed to a background level, then you've got an urban background level, and then those spikes are the proximity to traffic. And it's a complete nightmare trying to simply conduct an epidemiological study of this sort of, with these sorts of data. Next slide, please. But plenty of studies have been done within communities, and this is shows a meta-analysis of nitrogen dioxide and the prevalence of wheezing. And you can see a lot of variability. There is, in fact, a lot of heterogeneity. And the overall random effects estimate is 1.06 and bordering on the null. So that's yes. So studies have also been done on incidence of asthma in this kind of situation, and there are a few of them. There's a lot of variability. Mainly these cohort studies, and they have don't have a lot of power. But again, they're only getting a random effects estimate at 0.07, though it is statistically significant. So it's a little bit more encouraging if you're interested in, if you want air pollution to cause health effects, than when you look at the multi-community studies. Next one, please. Nearly finished now. This is unpublished data from the London traffic study, these are based on general practitioner records. Cohort of over 50,000 children aged 1 to 4 without a diagnosis of asthma, followed up for 7 years. And the outcome was first diagnosis of asthma in a practitioner. Now, the nitrogen dioxide, in fact, it was less, significantly lower incidence associated with nitrogen dioxide. On the other hand, with PM2.5, it was significantly increased. And then what is interesting is we also measured traffic particles specifically due to exhaust and non-exhaust sources, brake and tyre wear, and they didn't show anything. They didn't show effects that were greater than the overall PM2.5, most of which in London comes from regional transport. And at the bottom, we have the distance from traffic roads, and we found that the closer the individual was to the road, the less it was the risk of incidence of first diagnosis of asthma. Okay, next slide, please. Click again. Click them all, I think, for that one. Yeah, okay. Now, how do we interpret these results? Now, if you have a positive association, how do you interpret it? Well, first thing, we have to think about publication bias. Secondly, to decide, do we think this is incidence or prevalence? Now, incidence studies don't necessarily look at the incidence of the underlying condition of asthma. It could be, is it really an added case of asthma? Has it been identifying individuals who without air pollution would never have become asthmatic? Or is it measuring the accelerated onset of asthma? Or is it the first symptomatic manifestation of existing subclinical asthma using an exacerbatory mechanism? When we come to prevalence is a hybrid epidemiological measure. It reflects incidence and prognosis. And prognosis can be remission in symptomatic individuals, relapse in non-symptomatic. It can also reflect exacerbations if it pushes asymptomatic asthmatic into the symptomatic category. So it's very, very hard to come to the conclusion as what the mechanism of prevalence is because of this hybrid nature of the measure. And lastly, we have the question of heterogeneity. And here, my view is that the heterogeneity probably reflects differences in vulnerability of populations and individuals, and that we should really concentrate on that if we're going to understand what's happening and also for policy purposes. Next slide, please. Okay, good. Sorry, the animation. Well, null associations. First thing, they could be explained by low statistical power. Next one. Exposure misclassification is a real problem here, and it tends to bias results towards the null. So we have a problem here. We have low estimates in the first place, in which case confounding, uncontrolled confounding could be playing an important part. And then you have this question of bias towards the null due to exposure misclassification. Next one. Insensitive to the questionnaire, we have very, very crude tools, and we may, in fact, be using the wrong methods to measure morbidity from asthma. Next one. And then we have the question of heterogeneity of phenotypes. We tend to go and do surveys measuring wheezing in the population, and that could have their different underlying mechanisms. And so that is also a problem. Next one, please. So, these are my conclusions. They're very personal. Some may disagree. But I think in asthmatic individuals, ambient air pollution does make a relatively small contribution to the risk of exacerbation. But I'll say in parenthesis that if you study asthmatics, you find that air pollution is definitely associated with increased cough in those who have already had asthmatics. I'm not saying that air pollution is good for asthmatics. Next one. There's no convincing evidence that ambient pollution affects the occurrence of asthma over time. Next one. There is this paradox that I've mentioned that associations are more likely to be found within community studies than in through community studies. Next one. So my feeling is that air pollution exposure is unlikely to cause additional cases. That is, air pollution cannot alone cause asthma. Since there's no association with the studies at the community level, the question is whether one would expect that policies that reduce exposure to air pollution at the community level will actually affect prevalence. I'll stop there. I hope I haven't gone on too long, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? But this camera is
I can't hear.
Phil has a question for you.
Hi Ross, that's very, very interesting. Thanks very much for a great talk. I've got one question for you. So, most of the data you present is from the UK in terms of air pollution and asthma. And most of the data you present is related more to prevalence of asthma. I'm just wondering if you can think of, would there be a legitimate reason to look at the effects of air pollution on asthma hospitalizations, so I guess crises asthma attacks in Salvador and in Ecuador? Whether you think that would there be a legitimate reason to look at the effects of air pollution on asthma hospitalizations and mortality, or do you think that it's unlikely to be helpful?
Well, if you're looking at hospital admissions, the two examples that I measured were worldwide, and I'm sure they included some Brazilian studies. I don't think, in fact, there haven't been that many studies in the UK of time series studies. The prevalence studies are also quite widely spread, and so. But this question of regional variations is, I think, very, very important, because I mean, in South America, or more specifically in Brazil, with the most amazing system that we were hearing about earlier today, I mean, you have a possibility of looking at this in all sorts of different ways with sufficient power. But the question of vulnerabilities is very important. I mean, it could well be that socioeconomic factors, there are interactions with living standards and so on. And I think, I'm an epidemiologist and I'm interested in what causes asthma. I'm not an environmental person who is determined to find that air pollution is bad for you. I'm surrounded by those people in London, and they ignore results that they don't like. So I think my attitude to this is we mustn't let this air pollution distract us too much from the central problem is what on earth does cause asthma? And this is what has really occupied Phil for a number of years, and that's his sort of, that's his mission. And so I would think that it's definitely worth doing something, but as part of a more coordinated sort of multifactorial attack on this question, rather than just going for air pollution alone.
We have one more question, Rose.
So I'm trying to think about your within versus across community paradox. Do you think it's consistent with adaptation to the ambient level of air pollution, that the reason why the within community variations are found is because people are those are areas where there's a lot of variation within the community of the level of exposure, and so people can adapt?
Look, I'm terribly sorry, but there's a lot of distortion, and I'm not 100%. Yeah.
Have you looked at the ability of people to adapt to the level of air pollution over time at all?
Sorry, I'm still. Sorry, I still don't understand. I can't hear the question properly.
Maybe
I'm sorry.
Let me just,
closer to here, yeah.
so
But the microphone is here.
Close
okay?
to the microphone.
No, it's better if you come closer, yeah. If you
or I
move
can
there,
just repeat the question.
if you have an accident, and then disconnect.
So, hopefully you can hear me now.
Yes.
Great. I'm trying to think about your within community versus across community paradox, and I wonder if it has to do with adaptation to the ambient level of air pollution, and if you've looked at that. And the way I'm thinking about it is that maybe within those communities that have found some association, it's because there's a lot of variation in the level of exposure, and so people can't adapt to whatever level they're being exposed to.
Well, it's a hypothesis. I don't know. Is the answer. I'm hesitating because there is a paper by Elaine Fuertes, who some of you may be acquainted with, just a month ago in Bonn International, in which she looked at cohort studies in Europe and found no association with air pollution and asthma incidence and prevalence, and these are nearly all within community studies. And so, and there's a question of publication bias and so on, and I'm tending towards the view that actually there probably isn't such a paradox, and we're talking about sort of rather small differences in risk. And our own study from the traffic project, as you can see, is going in the other direction. And it's not the only study that I have seen which has shown an inverse relationship between particles and asthma, which, of course, could have something to do with ozone, because there's an inverse association between ozone and vehicle pollution, as you know. and ozone is the only gas in the atmosphere that we know for sure is toxic at ambient levels. You know, it all depends on whether you're going for nitrogen dioxide or PM or ozone. And so, anyway, try and answer your question. I don't know, and I think it would probably be almost impossible to disentangle by tools that we have at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much.
And Maurício has a question for you as well, Ross.
Oh, Rossi, thank you for your talk. And I would like to ask you a question related. You said that there is no evidence, no? And that the studies have a few methodological problems. No? Then my question is, do you think that is yet valid to investigate this relationship between pollution and the asthma? If in case it's positive, what you suggest in terms of approach, yeah, to explore the question more adequately and to overcome the insufficiency of previous investigation?
Well, I have a slide. I have two reserved slides, and the second one I think is relevant to this.
Is in your presentation the slides?
In my presentation, I had two extra slides.
Okay.
So if we go, not this one, the next one. That's it. I've thought about this a lot. You know, epidemiologists, we have to deal with the data that we have. We don't have the luxury of being able to design huge studies, and we do need huge studies, you know, to our specifications. And we don't have a measure like people who are interested in environmental lead had a biological measure that, you know, you could look at lifetime exposure to certain things. And when you think about problems of, you know, just using an annual average estimate associated with, say, morbidity, and you know, you're not taking into account indoor environment, you're not taking into account moving people around, question of exercise, the actual physiological data. I mean, there's so many things, and so I think we just lack we want. And then we also have really inadequate ways of measuring asthma in the first place. And on the right-hand side, I think, click it again, please, sorry.
That's the last one.
No, I see in the other, that's it, leave it like that, sorry. Yeah. So there are huge questions here, which we have not yet solved. And on the other hand, we need concepts, and we have very, very rudimentary concepts of different asthma phenotypes and of actual causality and of mechanisms. And so just because a gas irritates the lungs doesn't mean to say it causes asthma. But that's about as far as we've got, and it's very difficult to do chamber studies in children and so on and so on. So we could use the methods that are at our disposal now and apply them better, but I'm not sure that we will get much further until we've addressed some of the basically have a paradigm shift in our thinking about asthma. But the same goes for most other conditions, and I'm a public health person as well as a scientist, and so for public health you don't have to be 100% sure before you make a policy decision. So, you know, you only need evidence that's good enough for the purpose, and that's, so, you know, and don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but I have a feeling we're just going to see a lot more of the same, and we'll end up even with more meta-analyses, and they'll be still kind of adding up to the same thing. Sorry, I'll stop there.
Many thanks, Ross. If we don't have any other questions, maybe we can go for coffee for 10 minutes, and then we're going to continue with Phil and Álvaro after that.
subsides, which is distinct to other forms of lung disease where you get reduction in the lung capacity. So asthma normally has a normal lung capacity, but the problem is getting air out of the chest. Asthma is not caused by one single cause. It's a very heterogeneous condition caused by lots of different things that result in narrowing of the airways and shortness of breath. And one of the most common sort of classifications for asthma is whether asthma is allergic or non-allergic, because non-allergic mechanisms can also cause asthma. So classically understand asthma as being an allergic disease, but also a large proportion of asthma. So in industrialized countries, probably over 50% of asthma is non-allergic. While in places like Ecuador, something like 80% of asthma is non-allergic, particularly in population studies. Allergy tends to be associated with more severe disease, so if you, in the clinic, you'll see more allergic asthma. And when I talk about allergy, I mean sensitization to common things in the environment like house dust mite or pollen, for example. And you can test this just by scratching onto the skin something like house dust mite, and then after 15 minutes you see what's called a wheal, which shows you have allergic sensitization. And just very simply, what is asthma? So we have in the lungs, we have these tubes called bronchi. The bronchi are surrounded by muscle, and they have like a mucosal layer on the inside. And with asthma, you get contraction of the muscle, but also you get inflammation of the mucosa causing thickening of the airways. And that combined with reduction of mucus causes narrowing of the airways. So this is asthma. If you think of asthma, lung diseases are often thought of as being a disease of the tube. You can either get contraction of that tube, which can be permanent, with fibrosis, for example, which causes long-term problems in lung function, or it's reversible. The tube will go back to normal once the inflammation subsides. Asthma is reversible, so the lung function will go back to normal once the inflammatory source has gone. Asthma affects around about 358 million people worldwide, causing about 400,000 deaths. And one of the ways we can measure mortality and morbidity is what's called DALYs, disability adjusted life years. And so it causes about 24 million DALYs in 2015. This is from the Global Burdens of Disease Study. Most asthma deaths occur in low and middle-income countries, and this relates to not just severity, but also access to healthcare and treatment, which is key. In Latin America, about 40 million have asthma, and the prevalence of symptoms is highly variable between different countries. So in places like Mexico, has quite a low prevalence, about 7% of children of school age will have symptoms, while in Salvador and Brazil, a high proportions, but almost a third of children will have asthma symptoms from the surveys that have been done in school children. Within Latin America, the prevalence of asthma is highly variable between regions, but approximately half countries has a prevalence amongst school children of greater than 15%. And this is regarded as moderate to high prevalence. So Ross showed us a picture from the ISAC phase 3 study, and this just shows data from a study that preceded that called the ISAC phase 1, in which children were asked about the symptoms of asthma using a standardized questionnaire and survey. And what they showed was that asthma is typically high prevalence in places like Australia, New Zealand, and in the UK. But also what was interesting in this earlier survey was in Latin America, there were high prevalence areas, particularly coastal Brazil, on the Atlantic coast, and places like Lima and in Costa Rica as well, high prevalence of asthma. And this was quite interesting. It was an unexpected finding. And then other surveys have looked at the prevalence of asthma, and we can see that, yes, the UK, Australasia, the US and Canada has a high prevalence of asthma, but also within Latin America, particularly Brazil and Peru, appear to have a higher prevalence of asthma, greater than 10% prevalence. But it's highly variable within Latin America, the prevalence of asthma. And again, Ross showed these sort of temporal trends over time of changes in asthma prevalence. So this shows the prevalence of asthma and the prevalence of asthma symptoms, so I guess it's probably diagnosis, since the 1960s. We can see that there's a trend of increasing asthma prevalence over the last 50 years or so, in most all the places where this has been done. The most recent studies suggest that in the high prevalence countries, the prevalence has either plateaued or started to decrease slightly, so it may have reached maximum prevalence. But we see this temporal trend over the last 50 years or so of increasing asthma prevalence. So what causes asthma? This sort of standard understanding is it's a complex interaction between genetic susceptibilities and exposure to environmental factors. And as I've showed, there have been temporal trends of increasing asthma prevalence, which indicate changes in environmental exposures over time, because host genetics doesn't change so rapidly over 50 years. So in the context of a changing environment worldwide, we've seen an increase in the prevalence of asthma. And I guess the question is, what are those environmental exposures? So there are many different environmental exposures have been implicated in asthma causation. Some are thought to occur at specific time points in life. So some exposures during early childhood are thought to be important in the development of asthma. Also, may be important in protecting against the development of asthma. There's some specific interactions that have been defined between certain genetic susceptibilities and certain environmental exposures. So, for example, the CD14 gene, certain polymorphisms in the CD14 gene have shown to interact with exposure to endotoxin environment. Endotoxin from bacteria, so living in a dirty environment. Some people with some polymorphisms may get more asthma with exposure to endotoxin, while others may have less asthma or less symptoms. So there are quite complex interactions going on. And there may be interactions between exposures on development of asthma. So for example, people who have allergic sensitization to, for example, house dust mites seem to be more susceptible to the effects of rhinovirus or respiratory viruses on the development of asthma. There's the interaction between different environmental exposures to cause asthma. This is a fairly traditional paradigm of the environmental determinants of asthma. The microbiome is thought to be important, so the bacteria or the bugs we're exposed to in the environment from early life seem to be important in the maturation of immune response and whether we develop strong immune regulation. If we have strong immune regulation, we're less likely to have inappropriate inflammatory responses to allergens, causing allergy. And various exposures seem to be important in determining whether we have a healthy microbiome or an unhealthy microbiome. So, for example, vaginal delivery. If we're born through vaginal delivery, we acquire our mother's sort of vaginal and perineal flora, and that seems to be protected against allergy. While those who have cesarean section don't acquire those, so they acquire their early bacteria from the environment. They may not be the good bugs to have. Or if we're breastfed, for example, that may be protected. For example, the breast milk has lactobacilli, which are important, appear to be protective microbes against inflammation. Or if we're born on a farm, for example, we're exposed to a wide variety of different microbial exposures in the environment. That may protect us against asthma. If we're treated by antibiotics, causing an alteration in our microbiome, that may increase our risk of getting inflammatory diseases. And then, also important, the determinants of HPV allergy, if we're the right genetic susceptibility and we're exposed to things like dust mites or cats or rodents or whatever, we may acquire allergic sensitization. And then exposure to pollutants in the environment, for example, industrial or vehicle emissions, or exposure to tobacco smoke, may determine our lung function, so whether our lung capacity, we have smaller airways, more vulnerable to inflammatory insults, may increase our risk of getting asthma. So these sort of interact together in a complex way to determine the onset of asthma and how severe asthma is. And then there's a number of other environmental exposures which have also been associated with asthma, such as dietary factors, obesity, whether we're rich or poor. Being poor seems to be a risk factor for asthma. Psychosocial stresses, so maternal depression or exposure to violence in the community where we live may increase psychosocial stresses, may increase our risk of asthma. So asthma is complex. So this is basically from a more of a Latin American setting from a review in the Thorax of 2015. Here looking at what may determine two different phenotypes of asthma. These are not the only phenotypes. There's a whole variety of different phenotypes being defined. But for simplicity, we have atopic versus non-atopic asthma, which are determined by genetic factors and gene-environment interactions. For example, if we have African ancestry, that may increase our risk of asthma, perhaps through certain genetic polymorphisms or the fact that we may be poorer. So it's not clear whether nature or nurture is important in terms of ancestry, but genetic factors are important. Living in a poorly hygienic environment, we may be more likely to get parasite infections, and parasites can either increase or decrease the risk of asthma, depending on the circumstances, how endemic they are. Psychosocial stresses, depression, maternal depression, exposure to violence, abuse can lead to stress, and that has been associated with development of asthma. Whether we're diagnosed with asthma or whether our asthma is treated will determine whether we have severe asthma or our asthma is actually detected. And as I mentioned earlier, early life factors are important in terms of breastfeeding, prematurity. If we're born premature, we have smaller lungs. We're more susceptible to getting asthma, for example, from respiratory viral infections that cause asthma attacks. Dietary patterns are important, so micronutrients, vitamin D, obesity related to increased sedentarism, exposure to allergens and pollutants, exposure to tobacco smoke, and then there's the issue about is indoor pollution. We haven't talked about indoor pollution. Indoor pollution may be very important for asthma compared to outdoor pollution. Indoor pollution will assemble that are exposed to allergens in the environment, environmental tobacco smoke, biomass, for example, burning indoors may or may not increase our risk of asthma. So it's highly complex. There are a lot of environmental factors that are associated with development of asthma. And then relevant to our particular talk is the urban environment of asthma. The urban environment seems to be an important risk factor for asthma. And we took inequality as an issue in Latin America. That may lead to psychosocial stresses. So we have people with highly wealthy people living cheek by jowl with the poor, which is quite typical of Brazil. Living in an urban environment appears to be a risk factor for asthma. This is from a meta-analysis done by Alejandro, published recently, in which he compared studies that looked at urban versus rural populations in different countries, in LMIC countries. And what we can see is that in almost all studies we see an increased risk of asthma symptoms amongst those who live in the urban compared to rural areas, with an overall increased risk of about 50%, there's an odds ratio of 1.46, showing that urban residents is a risk factor for asthma, while actually rural residents is protected against asthma. So what are the factors associated with living in a city that are important in the development of asthma? So these are slides from Ecuador. Living in a traditional rural environment has been regarded as being highly protective against asthma. So these are examples from from Ecuador. You can see that lifestyle, habits, occupations are very different in a rural setting. For example, exposure to indoor and outdoor pollutants are going to be the same. I mean, you have no walls in your house. And then the rural populations, it migrates into the cities. They tend to settle around the peripheries of the cities. So you have rural migrants moving to the cities. They sort of, in many ways, they often replicate their rural exposures. So they live in wooden houses. They may have animals. They maintain the same diet. But they obviously have a lot of psychosocial stresses living in the urban environment. And then, as they become more established, they live in neighborhoods in which dirt is replaced by cement and asphalt, where they have electricity, where they spend a lot of time indoors watching television because going outside is dangerous. So they may get fatter and they may have access to a poorer diet, high caloric content and low nutrient content type diet, which is more accessible in an urban setting. So what is it about urbanization and the urban environment that increases asthma risk? So I've just summarized, this is from a review we wrote about 15 years ago where we were looking at, sort of speculating about the effects of an urban environment on asthma. So I'll just say what we said. Asthma in Latin America is considered to be a disease of an urban environment in which there are extreme social inequalities, with the majority of the population living in poverty or lacking access to basic infrastructure. And then we went on to say the causes of asthma in Latin America are likely to be associated with urbanization, migration, and the adoption of a modern westernized lifestyle, and environmental changes that follow these processes that include changes in diet, physical activity, hygiene, and exposures to allergens, irritants, and outdoor and indoor pollutants. That summarizes how urbanization may affect asthma. So risk factors for asthma in urban settings relating to urbanization and urban poverty. So I mentioned the change in the environment, exposure to environmental bacteria, so the substitution of soil by concrete. So we live in houses made of cement rather than houses made of wood, and etc. So we have cement floors rather than dirt floors. So exposure to microbes in the environment is dramatically changed. Migration is associated to rural-urban migration is associated with dramatic changes in lifestyle, diet, and physical activity. Moving to an urban setting, we're exposed to indoor pollution relating to smoking and biomass, indoor irritants, and allergens. So Ross showed a picture earlier of smoke indoors in Papua New Guinea. This is from the highlands in Ecuador, where this is how people live. So James mentioned adaptation to exposure to indoor biomass. So the people who live in here live, and this is how they are all day. It's cold up there, these houses are sealed, they burn wood all day long, and they're apparently unaffected. But if I go in there, I can't survive more than 2 or 3 minutes in there. That'll get very symptomatic. Outdoor pollution, so exposure to industrial and motor vehicle and waste disposal. Low birth weight. Low birth weight means you have smaller lungs, means that when you're born, you're exposed to viruses, you get more lungs, you get inflammation and narrowing of the airways causing symptoms and damage to the lungs. Diet and sedentarism, so you get changes in diet from a more traditional, varied diet to a diet which is low nutrient content and high in calories, junk food. And then with increased diet and reduced activity, we're more susceptible to obesity, and obesity is a strong risk factor for developing asthma. Living in an urban environment is related to a large number of new psychosocial stresses that may contribute to asthma development. I've mentioned ethnicity may be important either through genetic susceptibilities or through poverty. Access to healthcare, so whether we're diagnosed with asthma and if we have asthma, whether we're treated or not, will determine certainly prognosis. Overcrowding, living in overcrowded households, more exposed to infections, and parasites and respiratory viral infections may be important in terms of making your airways more inflamed and more likely to contract and relate to asthma symptoms. And then exposure to dirt in general, and I'll talk a bit about that. So this is looking at dirt exposure. So this is data from Mauricio's group, from a study called SCALA, Social Changes, Asthma, Allergy in Latin America, which has been a research collaboration, Álvaro, Maurício, our group in Ecuador. But here, this is a study from looking at children in Salvador. Children aged 7 to 11 years.
Yeah.
I think in which children divided as whether they're allergic or non-allergic, and looking at what factors may be associated with the presence of wheeze. So having a parent with asthma, which is a sort of a marker of genetic susceptibility, is a risk factor for both atopic, non-atopic and atopic asthma. Markers of poor hygiene, such as infrequent household cleaning, rodents in the home, attending daycare, which is contact with other children, more likely to become infected, has a variable effect on whether you have non-atopic or atopic asthma. And respiratory viral infections or respiratory symptoms related to viral infections seems to be an important risk factor, for example, for non-atopic versus atopic asthma. So I just mentioned briefly the potential effects of climate change, or how climate change may affect asthma morbidity. And when I talk about morbidity, I'm talking about measuring this by increases in hospitalization and death rates. So with climate change, increasing temperatures are likely to increase exposure to outdoor air pollutants, such as ozone, with the effects greater than the poorest urban neighborhoods. Smoke from wildfires may contribute to increasing droughts, increasing temperatures, increasing amount of wildfires may lead to an increased risk of asthma morbidity. And then, in the context of increasing temperatures and increasing concentration of CO2, we may actually have longer pollen seasons, increased concentration of allergens. There's some evidence that this actually occurs with global warming. Certainly in Europe, the seasons have increased in length, and the amount of allergen in pollen has actually increased, making perhaps more likely to get certain forms of allergic asthma. And the same is true for fungal sporulation. And then higher temperatures can increase the emissions of these volatile organic compounds that increase ground level ozone, which again leads to, it's suggested to increase airways inflammation and bronchial hyperreactivity. So I'll just leave it there.
Do you have any questions?
There's a lot of environmental factors there.
Yeah, but I think, I don't know if Álvaro going to talk in more detail, but maybe, because look, in allergy studies you have some measurement of asthma. The most common is hospitalization, death, yeah? You talk a lot on asthma in surveys, né?
Yeah.
Some of final surveys. How you see the use of these markers, yeah? Hospitalization and death, yeah? In epidemiological investigation, and yeah, like it would be possible to do in large scale studies, yeah? Eventually surveys, yeah? You have some surveys, for example, the PENSE survey in Brazil, that you have measurement of asthma in different parts, in capitals of Brazil, can be used to do studies, large study comparing effects. Then how you see the use of hospitalization and the death and the things, yeah.
Well, I was trying to give like a background of what factors may lead to development of asthma. I haven't really touched on what may cause exacerbations of asthma, hospitalizations of asthma. And in fact, we were thinking along the lines of air pollution, but given what Ross has talked about, we need to think carefully about how we're going to, whether we look at air pollution as a cause of asthma hospitalizations and asthma deaths, or whether I suggest that we look at a far more sophisticated way, perhaps looking at, need to bring in some local markers of deprivation, for example, by region, perhaps looking at housing quality as another factor, as a marker of indoor exposure to potential triggers for asthma. So looking at a healthier household with better ventilation may protect you against asthma, whatever the cause, so whether it's exposure to dust mites or whatever. In terms of asthma prevalence, we need to think about whether we're going to include that as a potential outcome in the study. If we're going to look at asthma prevalence, we need to be able to look back in time at potential exposure. So retrospectively. So, Maurício, you have data, there is data at a national level on asthma prevalence in school children.
Yeah, you have in the capitals. Yeah, Brazilian capitals. You have a survey called PENS. Yeah. PENS is a survey in school-age children. It's over 100,000 the sample of Brazil. Yeah, and in the last two surveys, I think there is 3 or 4 I read on. In the last two surveys, they include the asthma, some question of the Is Asthma questionnaire, yeah. And then you can extract some data on prevalence of asthma, yeah.
Vigitel also did the same. Vigitel, by phone, they also did the same. I think they included a question on asthma.
Yeah, my Vigitel is more adult, you know. Vigitel is adult. I'm not sure Vigitel, I'm not familiar with this data in Vigitel. But in PENS, you have this large sample, include you. Here you analyze the data of asthma on PENS, yeah. But maybe to think if there is in Vigitel also, yeah, you can have it. Vigitel also is in the capitals, yeah, of Brazil. No, it's only the capitals.
I think, so if that data being available and it's based in the big cities, we need, I don't think air pollution, based on what Ross has talked about, is going to be a particularly relevant exposure to look at asthma occurrence or asthma prevalence. I think that we need to think about factors more related to urban deprivation that may be more important to look at. So the other thing is about climate change. I'm guessing that we don't have a lot of data on changes in climate for Brazil over the last 20 years or so. Is there data for that?
Yeah, but maybe you can use the 3 layers now of problems. Now use the data of prevalence, data on hospitalization, data on mortality, yeah? Okay. And try to study these 3 layers now, and to see determinants of these 3 different things, yeah, to increase our explanatory capacity, yeah, as Ross put, yeah. I think you need to explain a very complex problem, yeah, and maybe use different outcomes in the same population, and then you have opportunity to explore different dimensions of the same problem. You know?
Yeah. Looking at a national level, I guess.
Yeah,
power,
yeah. Some you only have it like the surveys only the capitals, not on the territory, only capitals. Yeah.
Well, an important environmental stressor for asthma exacerbations is the burning in the Amazon and the forest fires. Because Cristóbal was saying, there's quite a high search for emergency room and inhalation, all this type of thing during the fire season.
There is some data on that, I think it's some paper published, yeah? You have published on that? No, but someone has published or no? No?
There were some publications on burning sugarcane in São Paulo, Sorocaba, that region, which is certainly similar. Now they stopped.
Yeah.
They still do it here in the Northeast. So
Really?
it's still, yeah, so it's still a common practice for sugarcane.
To the spatial geographers, and how easy it is to measure exposure to wildfire pollution? Is that PM 2.5 we look at, or what? Change the PM?
Yeah, there are some devices. I mean, someone showed yesterday, I don't know if it was Denise, the purple air.
Yeah.
They have monitors. It's a sort of collaborative. I don't know exactly how they work, but they have few monitors around the area. We can see it on
Yeah, but it's
on the
mostly
website.
towards the western part of the Brazil and the coastal area. It's not very it's not very widespread though.
Yeah. But I checked this last year, just after, I mean, during the fires in the Amazon, and we located some stations in Acre and few others. I mean, I don't have it in my mind, but I remember there's a few ones around there.
There was also a fire emissions that I showed on my slide. I think it's from UCAR, NCAR, one of those Colorado universities that put it out. So maybe that could be something also of interest. I think
And
it was-
as Seth was saying as well, via satellite data, you get, even though it's through wildfires, you're probably able to get the information of how it spread the Amazon with the satellite information as well. I think there was someone at IRI that was maybe
Yeah, the
working with
IRI has
wildfires.
done a lot on especially peatland fires in Indonesia. So they've done a lot of work to actually monitor how fires spread, not necessarily connecting it to health, but just understanding dispersion rates, diffusion models, and understanding localized impacts of fires. So maybe that could be a model that could be applied here in the Amazon.
Is there evidence for increased hospitalizations with that for asthma in the context of wildfire exposure?
In the case of ECHO, for example, I was reviewing the hospital admissions. The hospital admissions are higher in places with a high humidity, for example, the coast region and the Amazon region.
Okay.
As well, we got a relationship with the seasonal, in Quito, for example, when you got cold weather, the hospital admission of asthma increased, as well the pneumonia, bronchitis.
Right.
There is an association between these two respiratory diseases. Well, because I think non-atopic asthma is humidity, one risk factor, I'm right, and the other one is a previous respiratory infections, right? So I think we need to see in a different way as well, try to see how this change in the climate indicators may change as well the hospital admissions. Could be a good idea as well, right? It's quite simple. I think it's not. In the coast region as well, if you have an extreme event like floods,
Right.
increase the prevalence of pneumonia, bronchitis, and maybe as well asthma, because this is related with these two diseases.
So perhaps
We have
sorry.
We have another information source in Brazil, which is the ambulatory care, ambulatory service, but we don't have the personal information, just quantity by day, but they have a very interesting production indicator, such as inhalation, emergency
Nebulizer.
Yeah, how many we can count how many nebulization was made by day by health unit.
Perhaps if there are no more questions, perhaps we can go for Álvaro's presentation.
Are you sure you want to do this before lunch?
Yeah, that's what I'm concerned actually.
All
So,
the time.
so after lunch we have the discussion about the project, and then
Yeah, I
we
think
can go further
we go
about
now,
the
we go
medical
because
causes.
the problem with the lunch, if there is lunch, you know, so yeah. maybe. Then you can go lunch and stay 1 hour, yeah.
Just 1
Half
hour.
past 1 you come back.
Yeah.
Your presentation, 2 o'clock you start today.
Great, okay, that's great.
Okay. Well, we can keep things here. Yeah.
The thought process of everybody.